The following was recorded during the COVID-19 pandemic through Zoom meetings in accordance with local health guidelines. Hi, I'm Mike Maloney, and welcome to this special CSRM podcast series exploring the book Sports Outreach Fundamentals by Dr. Greg Linville. Joining Dr. Linville is Dan Stoffer and Andrew Fouts. If you would like to purchase your own copy of Dr. Linville's book, visit our store at csrm.org.
Welcome back, everybody, to another CSRM podcast. We have been discussing the fundamentals of sports ministry outreach, a great resource through CSRM with Dr. Greg Linville. And we've just been encouraging people. This resource is already available. And if you have it or you'd like to order it, go ahead and order it through our website. But we just encourage you to read each chapter that coincides with each topic, either before or after this podcast, just to help you continue to grow in your sports ministry outreach. Dr. Linville, in our last episode, we talked about our three-tier paradigm, and it was a great, I think, just a great way for us to build upon a foundation of theology and to develop our ministry in that way. Today, we're talking about, in chapter 4, the Fourfold Evaluative Rubric. So kind of tell us what that is and how we can apply that to the other things that we've learned in our development of a sports ministry within the local church.
Thanks, Dan. It's good to be with you guys again. I'm really enjoying our collaboration on this. First of all, I need to tell you that this was not chapter 4, and the previous chapter wasn't chapter 3. Actually, chapter 3 was chapter 1, and the editorial board came to me and just said, you know, you've got a number for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Why don't you just put them in that order? And so they're not necessarily maybe by priority, but it just seems that we come up with these numbers somehow, and it's just kind of interesting how that all, it was not intentional at all, but I think that their recommendations, we have a very strong editorial board of academics and practitioners, and so they hold us accountable. People should know that about Overwhelming Victory Press. So the Fourfold Evaluative Rubric. Why should you as a local church sports minister, or why should you as a sports-related paraministry staff person be concerned about this? For your job, to fulfill your calling. Because ultimately, if you are not producing what you say you're producing, people are going to say, we need to get rid of this bum. And so that old cliche of under promise but over produce comes in. And don't go into your church, again, goes back to our last segment, what do you do first? Don't go into your church and say, we're going to grow this church to 40,000 people in the next year. We're going to add 4 people to our league that have never played before, to our team. And then maybe we'll have 1 additional person join our church this year. Try to be real with what you want to do. But how can you actually produce anything unless you know what needs to happen? So the 4 words are relevant, strategic, efficient, and effective. And we often put them in 2s, meaning strategically relevant and efficiently effective. Let me start on that first part of that. Relevant. What sport is, we know sports rec and fitness overall is relevant, but in your community, what is the most relevant or strategic? In the United States, we have a state called Indiana. If you're not doing basketball in Indiana, you're probably not as relevant as you could be. If you played rugby in Indiana, you would be much less relevant. But if you didn't play rugby where, guys? New Zealand or South Africa, and all you did was basketball, you probably would not be as relevant, okay? And where you may think that cricket is a bug that you squash, if you played cricket and squash in England, you'd be very relevant. And yet in America, not so much. So strategic means not only overall that sports rec and fitness, but relevant in terms of the sports that you have. And if you don't have what's relevant to your community, it's probably, you're not going to probably reach them. Now let's put this into a segment that we talked about, the disconnects 2 times ago. If the community around you that has suddenly taken in a bunch of immigrants from Somalia, Dan, what sport are you going to go after?
Well, I would think probably soccer.
Okay.
Yep.
And if there's a Pakistani community, what would your guys' guess be?
Cricket.
Cricket. All right. So maybe what we need to do to be strategic and relevant in those situations is change our softball fields into cricket pitches. They call them pitches, not so much a field like we do. And that is going to cause maybe some difficulties for people. But we've always done it this way. Okay? So strategic and relevant is very movable. It's a moving target. And when a community is African American and all of a sudden an Asian community moves in, you need to probably consider how what we're going to do. Now, one of the biggest trends that's going on in the West today is wellness and wholeness, fitness. But fitness doesn't even touch totally. A fitness is you come and do a Zumba class or an aerobics class or something, all good. But wholeness and wellness would also say, how am I eating? And maybe a church would be relevant to do a once a month farmers market to go alongside of that, or cooking classes for whole foods, or all those new diets that are out there. How do you cook? And so don't think just sport. Think outside of that box to be strategic and relevant. Okay, now that you've got people strategic and relevant, and you've got things that are really helping them come to you, then we move into efficiently effective. Efficient is obviously economic. And so how can we best utilize our resources? And that may mean that you're going to have to retrofit something. You're going to buy some new equipment. You have to think, is this really going to be efficient? But ultimately, effective. Those first 3, strategic, relevant, efficient, have all got to have an effectiveness. If you are not effectively moving people from the community over the first disconnect into your sports rec fitness, wholeness, wellness, you're never going to be able to move them from there over to the second disconnect into your sanctuary and into your body life of your church. And so the effectiveness, you have to keep asking yourself that question. I know the YMCA, I worked on the YMCA staff for a decade or 2, and that every year we were supposed to, anyway, quote, we were supposed to evaluate every program to see if it was still effective. And we need to do that. And sometimes that might mean laying down something that we've done for a long time, or not doing it as much as maybe we once did it, so that we can add other things. But this is why it's so important for us to think about these things. What questions do you guys have, or anecdotes do you have for this?
A couple of things that came to mind. One of them was right at the beginning when you were talking about how to evaluate, because one thing, Dan, you and I share a little bit of a church planning and church rebuilding background. one of the things that's really hard is when you're trying to evaluate growth, especially, and you start out small. And so when you go to your investors and they're like, well, what are you at now? And it's like, well, we're now at, 20 people. And they're like, you're only at 20 people, but you're asking for you're asking for this kind of input. It looks small. But when you think about it in terms of, and I'm a baseball guy, so stats are, a big part of it. If you started with 10 people and in a year are at 20 people, that's 100% growth. That's not just, okay, we added 10 more people. No, you've doubled your size. And so one thing that can be helpful from an encouragement standpoint is to stop looking at individual numbers and start looking at it from a statistical standpoint. That's just a side note. But the other thing that I think, Greg, you bring up is when we talk about being strategic and relevant, I believe it was Tom Rayner that I saw had said this originally, but it could be completely off. If your church does not look like your community, then you're probably not doing something right. And so if you do have a church that is predominantly older and white, but the housing around you is full of young families that are mixed or Latino or Black, you probably need to switch up something within your evangelistic disciple making philosophies and mindset, because the yous and the who's are not matching. And this is one of those areas, again, that CSRM is definitely able to help you with and evaluate. So yeah, those two things are the things that kind of stuck out to me most as far as the things that we need to. Again, we talked with the 3-tier paradigm. We like to jump straight into the methods, but I think this is one of those things where the philosophy section fits best.
I spoke a lot to the relevancy, the strategicness. Let me speak a little bit more to the efficiency. This will speak particularly to those people who are your trustees, your finance board kind of people. Efficiency, I'm going to start with how do we become more efficient of the time of our, what we would call volunteers, but we really call them local church missionaries, the local community missionaries. Think about their time. They've got families, they've got careers, they've got their own physical fitness. How can we get them trained? One of the ways to be more efficient, rather than having a standalone training that they have to drive to your church, your ministry site 6 times or something, is that during your games, if you have a youth league and you got 4 games, that during game 2 and game 3, the coaches in the first segment, in this game 2, 1 and 3, coaches come to that training session, and in it's game 3, coaches in games 2 and 4 come. So they're there an extra maybe hour, but that's better than 2 hours of having to drive in and drive back and all that kind of stuff. So efficiency of how do we get this done? Maybe it's a 6-week small group Bible study that fits into that structure of your church that you're doing your training. You want to be very efficient in people's times. It's not just finance, but it's resource of people, because people have only a certain amount of hours that they're going to give you as a short-term missionary doing coaching in your league or whatever. So maximize that time. Let's talk about maximizing the facilities in an efficient way. First of all, either build, if you envision a new build, or retrofit something that would use multiple times in the same space. One of the biggest wastes in most church buildings, that's not the church, we're the church, we are the church, that's a church facility, it's a ministry site, is that a lot of it is used for an hour a week. Let's think about that. The classroom that you're doing Sunday school class with children can also be where you have your team meetings during the week. Another duplication would be that if you have some of your larger Bible studies, that can be where you have your league meetings or you have your team meetings. A shared worship space. Now, I know this is really hard for some people, but that You use it for worship through sport, Monday through Saturday, and then you use it for the traditional worship on Sunday morning and evening. And yes, you have to move furniture in and out, but okay, that you have that one spot, and so you have an efficiency. Um, you the aerobics class can use your Sunday school class. There's a lot of places there that you can duplicate the efficiency of your facility. And then we talk about how do you finance it? Well, there's three costs: construction cost, maintenance cost, and one that's really hidden, and that's risk management cost. And so let's see, how can we do this? Well, if you construct it in such a way that your maintenance is better. What do I mean? Oh, I see a lot of wall board that's used. And I also see a lot of that wall board that has holes punched in it. And it has to be replaced and replaced and replaced and sanded and painted. A concrete wall, block wall, never has a hole in it. It might need to be repainted every few years, but you're repainting that wall board. So in your building cost, it may cost you more initially, but your maintenance cost long-term is going to be much more efficient. A wood floor is more to put in, but the maintenance of it over carpet, over any of the synthetics and other things, it is far cheaper over the life of the building. How do you get that initially? We can also walk you through some of that stuff. But the cleaning of it is also, if you have a carpeted floor, do you know how long it takes you to run a vacuum over that? How many hours do you have to pay somebody to do that? And then it traps all the sweat, and there's an odor that comes with it. A wood floor, okay. But supervision cost is another part of this maintenance. Build your facility so that you have a central place where somebody can actually sit at their computer and do something on it, or make phone calls, but they can see everything. We encourage people to follow this spiritual principle. Where light is, darkness flees. Build it in such a way that you can manage it without having hidden rooms and hidden hallways. And the last thing is risk management. You've got to build it with safety in mind. You can't have your gym be a storage room as well, where somebody runs off the court and splits open their head on something that was stored on the side of it. You can't have cages, metal cages, around something that a basketball player can run into. You have to build it with risk management in mind, because a lawsuit can shut you down. You got to build it for storage. You got to build it with proper spaces, all of these kinds of things. So guys, I know we're basically out of time, but that's a little bit to the efficiency part of it. And if you're not financially and hour-wise with your volunteers and your local church missionaries, if you're not efficient, you're out of business.
This plays in a lot to what you've already talked about, and going all the way back to the first episode dealing with this book is, when we talk about sports ministry, this is not a, seasonal thing. This is a long-term investment. The evangelistic disciple making is long-term investment in people. The 3-tier paradigm is long-term investment in your leaders. This, we're talking now, even with the building and everything else, you need to be looking when you're building these things as this is an investment for the kingdom, not just say, let's get this up so we can get this league going. That's one thing I know that we talk about a lot within the small church initiative stuff, as well as our other consultations. But that's another big piece that we've got to remember is sports ministry in general is always a matter of investment and not just a side thing that we do because we want to say we have a basketball league.
Yeah, and what I love about this as we begin to wrap this up here, this rubric is a great process to evaluate everything. And we don't do enough of that in churches. That's why we have, that term sacred cows, things that we know are not working, whether it be in our sports ministry or worship or youth or children. We know that they're not working, but we don't ever evaluate them. And so they do become the sacred cow that prevents us from being as effective as we could be in ministry. And that's all the time we have here today. We just encourage you, go and read this chapter if you haven't already. Read this chapter and see how you can apply this to your ministry. And just know that we are here to help. If you want to reach out to us in any way, we want to help you to take your next steps with this process. So again, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to next week's episode as we continue to digest this book together. Thank you so much.
If you would like to purchase your own copy of Dr. Linville's book, visit our store at csrm.org. The CSRM podcast is a production of the Association of Church Sports and Recreation Ministers and their video production house, Overwhelming Victory Flix. Dr. Greg Linville is the executive producer, and Andrew Fouts is associate producer and editor. For more information about CSRM, visit csrm.org. For more information about Overwhelming Victory, visit overwhelmingvictory.org. The CSRM podcast is the flagship member of a new podcast network called Overwhelming Victory Radio. For more information on Overwhelming Victory Radio or to listen to our partner podcasts, visit overwhelmingvictory.org/OV radio. For CSRM Podcasts, I'm Mike Maloney. Have a blessed day.